The stage did not reach Windglass Pass. It stopped 6 miles below it. And when Miriam Vale stepped down into the road with one carpet bag, one ruined shawl, and $12 stitched into her hem, every man on Silver Pines Main Street turned to stare. Not because she was pretty, not because she was rich, because she was walking toward a place no sensible person entered after the first hard snow. The driver leaned from his seat and pointed up the mountain, where a dead telegraph line sagged between black pines. "That station's closed, ma'am. Has been since the company moved the wire." Miriam looked up at the poles disappearing into the stormlight. "Then I will reopen it." The driver laughed once, then stopped when he saw her face. She had come from St. Louis with a letter promising winter work at Windglass Signal Station, ledger keeping, meals for freight men, a roof, wages paid in coin. More than wages, it promised distance. 600 miles of distance from a husband who had called her troublesome for reading his accounts too closely, and ungrateful for refusing to smile while he ruined them both. In the dry goods store, the owner studied her letter and shook his head before he even finished the first line. "Cyrus Bell wrote this?" "Yes." "Then you were sold smoke. Bell left before harvest, owed half this town money." Miriam's fingers tightened around the paper. "The station?" "Locked by the telegraph company first, stripped by scavengers next. Snow will bury it by Christmas." He glanced at her thin boots. "There is kitchen work at the hotel. Widow Graves takes quiet women." Miriam folded the letter carefully. "I did not cross half the country to become quiet." That made the store go still. She bought flour, salt pork, coffee, lamp oil, matches, 3 pounds of beans, a coil of rope, and boots made for a boy who had never collected them. They were too wide. She stuffed the toes with rags. By the time she left Silver Pine, snow had begun to slant across the road. The town watched her climb, some with pity, some with judgment, some with the dark curiosity people have when they know they are watching either courage or stupidity, and they are willing to wait for the difference. The logging road rose into timber, then into rock. The coal did not merely touch Miriam. It entered her sleeves, her collar, the seams of her gloves. It found the places city life had kept soft and began correcting them. Every step made the carpetbag heavier. Every bend in the road revealed another bend beyond it. Once she stopped under a leaning telegraph pole and rested her palm against the weather-cracked wood. The wire above her hummed in the wind. Deadline or not, it still knew how to sing. Dusk had nearly swallowed the pass when she saw the station. Windglass Signal Station stood on a shelf of stone above the valley. A squat timber building, a stable with half its roof caved in, a tool shed leaning into drifts, and one telegraph pole broken clean at the crossarm. The front door was open. Snow had blown across the floor. Inside, mice had held court. The stovepipe hung loose. The desk had been stripped of drawers. There was one cracked enamel cup, a chair with 3 good legs, and a cupboard containing 2 tins of peaches so old the labels had gone gray. Miriam set down her bag. She looked at the empty room, at the cold stove, at the ruined line, at the job that had never existed. Then she removed her gloves, rolled up her sleeves, and went to work. By midnight, the stove was breathing. A lamp burned on the old telegraph desk. Her wet socks hung from a wire where messages had once been clipped for dispatch. She ate beans from the cracked cup and warmed both hands around it. For the first time in months, no one told her to soften her voice. No one told her she was difficult. No one told her a wife had no business asking what became of the money. Outside, the mountains shut the world away with snow. Inside, Miriam Vale sat beside a borrowed fire in a stolen beginning and smiled. She did not know a man had seen that light from a ledge above the pass. She did not know he had been watching the dead station for 3 winters, making sure no fool tried to sleep there when the weather turned. She did not know Jonah Voss would find her tracks at dawn. And she did not know that by choosing a ruined shelter over a respectable cage, she had just sent the first true signal of her life. The sound woke her before daylight. Miriam rose from a pile of coats and blankets by the stove, one hand already reaching for the hatchet she had laid beside her. Another knot. Not polite, not frantic, certain. The door opened before she could answer, and a shape filled the frame. For a moment, it seemed less like a man than part of the weather itself. A bare hide coat whitened with frost, a beard stiff with ice, shoulders broad enough to block the storm behind him. Miriam lifted the hatchet. "Take one more step, and I will make you regret it." The man stopped. His eyes, dark and tired under frozen brows, moved from the hatchet to her boots, then to the smoking stove, then to the cracked window where snow was already pushing through. "That stove will kill you before I do." His voice sounded unused. Miriam did not lower the blade. "This is company property. I am employed here." "No, ma'am. You are freezing here." He stepped inside anyway, not toward her, but toward the stovepipe. He pulled off one glove with his teeth, gripped the loose iron, and twisted it into place with a grunt. Smoke that had been seeping into the room began drawing upward. Miriam coughed before she could stop herself. The man glanced at her. "Headache?" "No." "Liar. I did not invite you in. Mountain did." He crossed to the door, bent, and shoved a broken crate against the gap at the bottom. "Name?" "Mrs. Vale." He looked up at the title, not the answer. "Jonah Voss." "I did not ask." "Most don't. They hear anyway." He carried in wood without asking permission, then tools, then a canvas pack. He worked like a man who considered explanation a waste of warmth. In 20 minutes, the door latched, the stovepipe held, and a scrap of oiled hide was nailed over the cracked window. Only then did he face her properly. "You came up alone?" "Yes." "In a storm?" "Yes." "With city boots and 1 day's sense?" "I have provisions for a week." "That may be the saddest sentence I hear all winter." Miriam felt heat climb her neck. "I managed last night." "You got lucky last night." He pointed toward the ceiling where the rafters were bowed under old snow. "This place is a coffin if the next drift settles wrong." "I will not return to town." "I did not tell you to." That silenced her. Jonah opened his pack and removed dried venison, a bundle of herbs, and a small tin kettle. His hands were scarred, square, and careful. They looked capable of breaking a man's jaw or mending a watch, depending on which the hour required. He set water to heat. "You have people below?" "No." "People anywhere?" Miriam's jaw tightened. Not that claim me. Something shifted in his face. Not pity. Recognition, maybe. The kind one exile offers another without making a ceremony of it. Then listen once. The station will not hold heat. The stable roof is down. The spring behind the shed is frozen over. If you sleep here through the next blow, I will be digging you out when the thaw comes. I suppose you expect me to faint and be carried away. I expect you to decide whether pride tastes better than breathing. Miriam hated him for the accuracy of that. She looked at the little fire she had coaxed from nothing, the cup, the damp hem of her dress, the letter that had brought her there, folded on the desk like a fraud wearing manners. I have nowhere to go. Jonah nodded once, as if that were an answer he respected. I have a winter place above the cut. Stone walls, water close, food enough if measured. You can come until the weather eases. And then? Then you choose. The word landed harder than comfort would have. Choose. Silas had chosen for her. His mother had chosen for her. Men at banks, hotels, and ticket windows had decided what a woman alone deserved to be charged, told, denied, or warned against. This stranger, rough as split timber, offered no tenderness, only a choice. Miriam lowered the hatchet. Give me 5 minutes. Take 3. Sky's turning mean. The climb to Jonah's winter place was worse than the road to the station. He tied a rope from his belt to hers, then stepped into the white emptiness and told her to follow exactly where he placed his feet. The mountain erased distance. It erased sound. It erased direction until the world became Jonah's back, the rope in her fist, and the next place to put one freezing foot. Once she fell hard enough to lose the breath from her lungs, Jonah was there instantly, hauling her upright. Still with me? No. Good. Liars stay conscious. She almost laughed, and hated that too. By the time they reached the dugout, Miriam could no longer feel her toes. It was not a cabin in any civilized sense. It was half built into the mountain, half timbered from the outside, with a roof pinned under stone and a chimney barely showing through snow. Inside, though, it was warm. Not pretty, warm. Shelves cut into rock held jars, powder tins, rolled hides, tools, sacks of beans, a flour barrel, 3 rifles, 2 books, and a row of dried herbs tied with red string. A fire slept in a stone hearth. Jonah eased her onto a stool, knelt, and pulled off her frozen boots before she could protest. Can you feel this? He pressed one toe. Miriam gasped. That is a yes. Lucky. I am beginning to resent that word. Resent it alive. He wrapped her feet in wool, put a bowl of stew into her hands, and took the hatchet she had forgotten she still held. When she stiffened, he set it beside her within reach. Not taking your teeth, Mrs. Vale. Just letting you eat without cutting yourself. The stew tasted of rabbit, onion, and smoke. She would have called it plain in St. Louis. On that mountain, it was salvation. Jonah moved about the room, hanging her wet things, measuring wood, banking the fire. He did not stare, did not crowd, did not soften his voice into false gallantry. That made him harder to distrust. At last he pulled up the other stool. You can sleep after the mountain is done with you. Miriam froze. He noticed and frowned. That means eat, warm your blood, check your hands, then sleep. It does not mean whatever your face just decided it meant. Her cheeks burned. Your phrasing is poor. My company is usually a mule. Despite herself, Miriam laughed. The sound startled them both. A smile almost formed under Jonah's beard, then vanished. Outside, the storm struck the mountain with both fists. Inside, the fire held. And for the first time since she had left St. Louis, Miriam slept in a room where no one owned her fear. Morning came sharp and blue. Jonah was already outside when she woke. She heard the scrape of shovel against packed snow, then his boots, then the door. He entered carrying 2 buckets and a dead hare. Weather's cleared, lessons began. Good morning to you as well. Morning is implied. He gave her coffee so strong it seemed less brewed than forged. Then he taught, not gently, clearly, how to bank coals so a fire lived through the night, how to split kindling without wasting strength, how to read snow crust, cloud shoulders, pine smoke, and the thin silver light that meant wind before noon, how to find water under ice without putting a boot through, how to tie knots that held under panic, how to set a snare, how to clean a rabbit without making suffering into theater. Everything up here pays for what it takes, he said, his knife moving clean and fast. Men forget that. Mountains remind them. Miriam watched, though her stomach turned. I was raised to believe ladies should never see such things. And did blindness feed anybody? No. Then look. So she looked. Days passed into a rhythm hard enough to bruise and steady enough to trust. Coffee before dawn, wood, water, traps, fire, food, needlework by lamplight, not decorative embroidery, but repairs that kept cold from finding skin. Miriam's hands split and bled, then hardened. Her shoulders ached, then strengthened. She stopped apologizing to door frames when she bumped them. She stopped asking whether work was appropriate for her and began asking whether it was finished. Jonah saw everything and praised almost nothing. But once, after she split 10 lengths of pine without ruining a single piece, he said, "Better." It warmed her for 2 days. On the 12th morning, he took her down the trap line. The forest stood silent under new snow. Jonah moved with the economy of a shadow. Miriam followed, trying to place each snowshoe where his had been. At the 3rd snare, the rope had been torn loose and the snow churned with tracks. Jonah crouched. His expression went flat. What? Cat. Miriam scanned the trees. A mountain lion? Large Tom. He has been walking with us since the ridge. Her mouth went dry. You knew? Since the creek. And did not think to mention it? You were walking steady. Mentioning it would have made you walk stupid. A branch cracked behind them. Miriam reached for the knife at her belt. Jonah's hand lifted slightly. Fear is useful. Panic is wasteful. The cat did not attack, not that day, but Miriam felt its attention through every step home, a gold-eyed judgment hiding in the timber. She did not run. She did not cry. She did not beg Jonah to carry her rifle. That night, while she stirred beans and salt pork in the iron pot, Jonah said from his bench, "You did well." The spoon stopped in her hand. I was terrified. Yes. That is not doing well. Doing well is being terrified and still doing what keeps you alive. Miriam turned back to the pot before he could see her face. Later, she found him holding a harmonica wrapped in cloth. You play? Poorly. May I hear poorly? He considered refusing, then lifted it to his mouth. The tune that came out was not poor. It was low and aching, the kind of song a man plays when words have failed him for years. When he finished, Miriam said nothing at first. Then, softly, "Who did you lose?" Jonah's fingers closed around the harmonica. For a long moment there was only fire. "My sister, Ada. She thought the past belonged to her because she was born under it. I told her not to cross after the thaw. She went anyway." "Avalanche?" "Slide took the cornice, took her with it." His voice did not break. That made it worse. "I am sorry." He nodded once, not accepting comfort, but not rejecting it either. After that, town sounded like lies. Up here, danger tells the truth. Miriam looked into the fire. "My husband preferred lies that balanced on paper." Jonah waited. She had not meant to speak, but the mountain had a way of pressing truth out of people, like cold pressing sap from pine. Silas Vale kept accounts for other men and stole from his own house first. I found it. Notes due, mortgages hidden, money borrowed against my father's silver and my mother's clock. When I asked, he called me disloyal. When I showed his mother, he called me unfit. Jonah's eyes had gone very still. "He sent me away with fare to my aunt's town, but my aunt died 4 years ago. He knew." "Did he strike you?" "Not with his hand." Jonah's jaw tightened. "Some men leave fewer bruises and do more damage." The words were so exact that Miriam could not answer. After a while Jonah said, "You are not hard to keep, Mrs. Vale. He was too small to stand beside you." No one had ever said it that way, not as consolation, as fact. That night Miriam lay awake listening to the fire, the wind, and Jonah turning pages in one of his 2 books. The mountain had not become safer, but for the first time safety did not feel like the same thing as permission. The worst storm came under a clear sky. Stars were out when they slept. By midnight the dugout shook. Jonah was awake before Miriam sat up. "Get the lamps down." They moved without debate. She secured the shelves. He braced the door. She fed the fire before it could sink. He tied the outer shutter with rawhide. Together they dragged 2 wood boxes against the wall where the wind hit hardest. By morning the window was white. By evening the world had vanished. They were shut in for 3 days. Storm days changed a person's insides. There was no trap line, no horizon, no task large enough to outrun thought. Jonah taught her saddle stitching. She read aloud from a battered atlas whose margins had been filled with Ada's jokes. They melted snow, measured flour, rationed coffee, and listened to the wind looking for weakness in the roof. On the second night, Miriam asked, "What frightens you?" Jonah stared into the fire, being responsible for another grave. She felt the answer in her own ribs. "That is why you almost left me at the station." "I did not almost leave." "You considered it." "I consider every hard truth. Then I do what lets me sleep." "And saving me lets you sleep?" "No." His eyes lifted. It makes sleep harder. The storm shoved against the door. Miriam drew the blanket around her shoulders. I am afraid of becoming agreeable again. Jonah frowned. Agreeable? The kind of woman who lowers her eyes because a room prefers it. The kind who laughs at insults because the alternative is trouble. The kind who knows the truth and lets men call it imagination. Her voice thinned. I would rather face that cat in the timber than go back to being praised for vanishing. Jonah's answer came after a long silence. First night I found you, you stood in a poisoned room with a hatchet raised and smoke in your lungs. That was desperation. Maybe, but desperation shows what's under the manners. He leaned forward, elbows on knees. Under yours is iron. The word entered her quietly and stayed. Not silk, not trouble, not shame. Iron. On the third night, the wind eased near dawn. Miriam had fallen asleep sitting beside him, her head against his shoulder. When she woke, neither of them moved away. Sunlight opened the shutter in a golden seam. Storm's past, Jonah murmured. Not all of it. No. His hand, rough and warm, closed over hers. Not all of it. They dug out together. The snow had sculpted the pass into a new world. The station below was nearly buried on one side, but still standing. The broken telegraph pole leaned like an old soldier refusing to lie down. Miriam looked at it for a long time. What if it was not a signal station anymore? Jonah followed her gaze. What else would it be? A winter house. A place for freight men in storms. A place to dry pelts before market. A place where a woman with no claim left could earn one. He studied her. That is a longer thought than surviving tomorrow. I am tired of only surviving tomorrow. He looked down the pass, then back at her. Then we make a longer plan. Spring did not come softly to Windglass Pass. It came with mud, broken ice, and men. 5 of them walked up from the mining road on a bright morning when Miriam was outside hauling water. Their coats were good. Their boots were new. Their rifles were not. The leader smiled before he spoke, which told her enough. Morning, ma'am. We heard the station was empty. You heard wrong. He looked past her toward the building Jonah and Miriam had spent weeks repairing. Name's Callum Drake. Argent Creek Mining Syndicate. That shelf sits above a vein we intend to survey. Bell gave us verbal use of the station. Bell owned debts, not this land. Drake's smile sharpened. A lady lawyer? No, a lady who reads before she signs. The men laughed. Jonah stepped from the tool shed with a hammer in one hand and a rifle in the other. The laughter stopped. Drake? Voss. Thought you stayed above the cut. I go where trouble gets loud. Drake's eyes moved between them and found the story he wanted. Well, ain't that domestic? Miriam felt Jonah's silence harden beside her. But she stepped forward before he could answer. You are standing on improved property under active claim. You have been told to leave. Drake removed a folded paper from his coat. And you are Miriam Vale of St. Louis. Her blood cooled. That is my name. Wife of Silas Vale, who says you disappeared with household money and a garnet brooch. Every man's face changed. Not with belief exactly, with appetite. Jonah's rifle shifted. Miriam raised a hand. No. He went still, but barely. She faced Drake. My husband gave me $12, one trunk, and the letter ordering me out of his house. Can you prove that? Yes. The answer took some of the pleasure from his face. Paper burns, Mrs. Vale. So do mining charters. This time, no one laughed. Drake stepped closer. You think you can hold a station, a pass road, and a claim with a hermit and a bad reputation? Miriam's heart beat hard, but her voice did not shake. I held a fire through a blizzard with wet matches. I held a rifle line while a mountain lion circled the trees. I held a man twice your courage through fever and did not sleep for 30 hours. She stepped closer too. You are not the worst weather I have seen. Jonah made a sound low in his throat, almost pride, almost warning. Drake looked from her to Jonah, recalculated, and folded his paper. Town will hear. Town always hears, Miriam said. It rarely listens. The men left, not defeated, delayed. That evening, Jonah taught Miriam to shoot at distances that were not meant for rabbits. She hated the lesson. She learned it anyway. The next week, they went to Silver Pine. Miriam wore a divided canvas skirt she had sewn herself, a brown jacket patched at the elbows, and Jonah's old hat because it kept the sun from her eyes. The town noticed every inch of it. Whispers followed them from the blacksmith to the land office. The clerk, Mr. Pell, looked at Miriam as though a weather-beaten woman at his counter offended the furniture. I need to file a residence and improvement claim for Windglass Station, she said, and articles for the Windglass Pass winter house. Articles? A business. His pen hovered. Filed by Mr. Voss? Filed by Miriam Vale and Jonah Voss as equal partners. That word struck the room like a dropped pan. Partner. Not ward. Not mistress. Not rescue. Partner. Mr. Pell coughed. There may be complications. Then write them clearly. The mining syndicate has expressed interest. They have expressed many things. None are a claim. He looked to Jonah, hoping for a man to translate her into something smaller. Jonah did not oblige. You heard her. Miriam produced Silas's letter. The paper had traveled in a hidden pocket through train smoke, cheap boarding rooms, mountain snow, and the long winter. Its creases were soft from being touched when she needed proof she had not imagined her own exile. Mr. Pell read it. His ears reddened. This appears to weaken any accusation of flight. It destroys it. Mrs. Vale, it destroys it, she repeated, and because paper still mattered below the mountain, he stamped their filings. Outside the office, 3 women waited near the pump. One was a hotel cook named Ruth Bellamy, broad-shouldered, sharp-eyed, with hands that knew both bread dough and battlefield bandages. Miriam had met her while buying salt. Ruth nodded toward the papers. You truly building a winter house? Trying. Hiring? When we can pay fair. I can cook, nurse, mend, and throw a drunk off a porch if he forgets manners. Jonah looked at Miriam. Miriam looked at Ruth. Come Monday. By summer, Windglass Pass had changed, not into a town, never that, into something better, a refuge with work in it. Ruth came first. then a young widow with 2 boys and a talent for curing hides. Then a German seamstress who had left a miner after he mistook marriage for ownership. Then a quiet girl from the hotel who could keep accounts faster than Mr. Pell and lied badly enough that everyone understood not to ask what she was running from. They repaired the station roof, raised the smokehouse, built a drying room for pelts and a bunk room for stranded freight men. Hung a sign carved by Jonah's hand. Windglass Pass, Winter House. Meals, shelter, repairs, fair weight, fair price. Under it, in smaller letters, Miriam insisted upon, no woman turned away for lack of explanation. The business did not make them rich. It made them rooted. Freight men paid for meals and bedrolls during storms. Trappers paid to dry furs before market. Teamsters paid for shoeing help, leather repair, coffee, and information about the pass. Information was worth more than gossip up there, which was why the syndicate hated them. Callum Drake tried law, then rumor, then bribery, then a man with a torch in the drying room. Ruth hit that one with a cast-iron skillet before he found the lamp oil. The final attack came through Silas. He arrived in Silver Pine in a dark coat too fine for the mud, with his mother on one arm and a deputy on the other. By noon, half the town had invented reasons to stand near the land office. Miriam walked down from the pass with Jonah beside her and Ruth behind her, carrying a carpet bag full of papers. Silas looked older than when she left. Not wiser, only thinner in the soul. "Miriam," he said, as if he owned the name, "this foolishness has gone far enough." She stopped 6 feet from him. "Has it? You have embarrassed me." "That was never difficult." A sound moved through the crowd. His mother gasped. Silas's mouth tightened. "I am prepared to be generous. Return with me, and I will not press charges." Ruth muttered, "How noble of the thief to forgive the pantry." Miriam opened the carpet bag. "No." She handed the deputy 3 documents. The letter ordering her from the house. A bank copy showing Silas had borrowed against property that was not his, and a statement from the ticket agent in St. Louis confirming the amount Silas gave her when he put her on the train. The deputy read slowly. Men with authority disliked being forced to see. Silas's color changed. "Miriam, those are private matters. You made them public when you called me a thief." His mother stepped forward, eyes bright with fury. "You are still his wife." "I was his wife when he sent me into Wetter with $12. You were difficult." Miriam smiled without softness. "No, I was accurate." Jonah's hand brushed hers, not to hold her back, to remind her she did not stand alone. The deputy folded the papers. "Mr. Vale, I see no grounds for arrest." Callum Drake, standing near the saloon, cursed under his breath. Silas saw his last weapon break and reached for the old one. "You will regret this when he tires of you," he said, nodding toward Jonah. "Men like him do not keep women. They keep wilderness." Miriam looked at Jonah then, at the man who had never asked her to shrink, never touched what fear had not offered, never called protection ownership. Jonah took off his hat. "I do not keep her," he said. His voice carried down the whole street. "I stand where she tells me there is work worth doing." That was when Miriam understood she loved him. Not because he had saved her from the mountain, because he had taught her she could save herself, then stood proud of the fact. Silas left that afternoon without her. His mother left with him. Drake left town 2 days later when the deputy began asking questions about the torch in the drying room. Silverpine did not become kind overnight. No town ever does. But it became careful. Careful how it spoke of the women at Windglass Pass. Careful how it measured a business that paid its debts, fed travelers, repaired gear honestly, and sent more coin through the valley each month than the syndicate had ever managed in promises. Autumn came back gold, then red, then the first white warning on the peaks. On the anniversary of the night Miriam first lit the stove in the dead station, Jonah found her outside under the repaired telegraph pole. The old wire was gone now. In its place, a bell line ran from the station to the stable and down toward the lower road, so lost travelers could ring for help when storms hid the door. Jonah carried something small in his palm. Made this. It was a ring carved from elk antler, polished smooth, with a tiny line burned around it like a horizon. Miriam stared at it. "Jonah Voss, are you asking neatly or badly?" "Badly, most likely." "Go on, then." He swallowed. "I love you. I love your iron, your temper, your accounts, the way you argue with bread dough and win. I love that you built a place where women can arrive without explaining every bruise the world left on them." His voice roughened. "I do not want to own 1 hour of you. I want to be chosen for them." Miriam's eyes burned. "That is a better proposal than you warned me to expect." "Is that a yes?" "It is a yes. To marriage, to partnership, to winters, to arguments over wood piles and invoices, to all of it." He slid the ring onto her finger. When he kissed her, the bell line moved in the wind above them and gave one clear note. That winter, Windglass Pass stayed open through 3 blizzards. 12 travelers slept under its roof who would not have reached town. 4 women came up the road with stories they were not required to tell. 2 stayed. 1 left in spring with wages, boots, and her own name spoken without shame. Years later, men in Silverpine would say the old station was saved because Jonah Voss knew the mountain. Women would say it was saved because Miriam Vale learned it. Both were true. But the deeper truth was this. A ruined station had waited on a frozen pass, its wire cut, its signal dead, while the world below decided it was finished. Then one woman climbed to it with bad boots and a false letter. She lit a fire where messages used to pass. She made a home where abandonment had been. She turned shelter into work, work into proof, and proof into freedom. Miriam Vale had climbed toward a dead signal station, and by the time the mountain was done with her, she had become the signal herself.